Hi, this is Scott Wilkinson, host of Home Theater Geeks. In episode 63, I chat with David Cole and DJ Roller about their new company, Next 3D, which delivers high-quality 3D by cable, satellite, or online. So stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Home Theater Geeks is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Home Theater Geeks with Scott Wilkinson, recorded April 25th, 2011, episode 63, 3D, The Next Generation. This episode of Home Theater Geeks is brought to you by Netflix. Watch thousands of TV episodes and movies streamed to your PC or TV instantly. Plus, get DVDs and Blu-rays by mail in about one business day. For your free trial, go to netflix.com/twit. Hey there, Scott Wilkinson here with UltimateAVMag.com and HomeTheater.com. This week's guest geeks are David Cole and DJ Roller, co-founders of Next 3D, a very interesting company that I met at NAB that offers a new way to deliver 3D via cable, satellite, and online even. Hey, David and DJ, welcome to the show.
Hey, Scott, how are you?
Good, thanks.
Hey, Scott. Glad to be here.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Thank you. So nice for you both to be here. Those of you who are tuned into the live video stream at live.twit.tv or logged into the chat room at irc.twit.tv can post questions for Dave or DJ, and I'll pass on as many as I can. So let's start with a little bit of background. DJ, I know you're primarily a filmmaker, correct?
That's correct.
So what have you worked on?
My background's in 3D. It started about 10 or 11 years ago, and been involved with several milestone 3D projects, from some of the first ones that came out, which was Ghost of the Abyss, which was a 3D IMAX film, U2 3D, Wild Ocean 3D, Journey to the Center of the Earth, and several others.
So I see the U2 3D poster there behind you.
That's correct. Yeah.
Now, were you the director, the stereographer? What was your involvement with those projects?
3D cinematographer. Each project's different, but a 3D cinematographer on U2 3D. And on Journey to the Center of the Earth, I shot the live-action 3D sequences in Iceland. But I'm a producer and a director of photography, typically. Right now, we have two films in production. One's called The Last Reef, and the other one is a Great White Shark 3D IMAX film. And so that's kind of where Dave and I come together as far as the foundation of Next 3D is this both have a stereoscopic background and a desire to get quality 3D to the home.
Mm-hmm. And Dave, how about your background? What brings you to this party?
I'm primarily an engineer and a technologist, but also an entrepreneur. And in the mid-1990s, my company developed one of the first digital distribution systems for stereoscopic video. It was MPEG-2-based distribution system, which was designed as a virtual reality image server or ride controller. And I also developed a shutter glass product in the mid-1990s as a PC gaming system. And so fast forward to about 5 years ago, I had a chance to meet DJ, and we started talking about this new renaissance of 3D. And I said, well, interestingly enough, I have a technology that has developed and matured over time, a platform to encode stereo and distribute it very efficiently. And we began talking about the home market and home distribution, and that's how Next 3D was formed.
Mm-hmm. So what's wrong with current broadcasting, 3D broadcasting, that your system, as we discussed at NAB, works towards solving?
What's happening right now with broadcasters, satellite cable broadcasters, and even video-on-demand distributors is that they're utilizing existing 2D video distribution infrastructure to pump the 3D image down the wire. And in order to do that, they actually squeeze the two eye views that are required to get a stereo image into one frame. So they reduced the resolution in half. If you've ever tuned a cable channel that's broadcasting 3D, you'll see two images, so two side-by-side images or on top and bottom. In either case, what's been done is they've squeezed the image, compressed it to fit into a video frame. And the problem with that is that you lose information dramatically in one dimension, either the horizontal or vertical. So your brand new 3D, high definition 3D television is actually not delivering a high def 3D signal. In addition to that, once the image is compressed, in order to send it over to the wire to you, once it's squeezed, if you will, to send it over to the wire to you, it has to be digitally compressed. And that introduces error. And when the image is then reinflated from that squeezed side-by-side image, it actually expands that error in one dimension. So not only are you losing resolution, you're then expanding the amount of noise to signal in one dimension, which is it's sort of two strikes against the process. And where that becomes a significant problem is that stereo images, the brain, in order to perceive stereo images accurately, really needs hard edges. It needs the solid definition of an object in order to say where it exists in space. And so if you compromise that by making the image quality fuzzy, the brain has a hard time. It struggles to position the object in space, which is why the two-dimensional, using a 2D infrastructure to pipe a 3D image is a convenient approach, but it limits the quality very dramatically.
Now, I'm seeing a bunch of comments in the chat room about people who experience getting headaches when they go to 3D movies and so on. Does your system address this at all?
Well, yeah. One of the worst forms of eye strain that can be caused by stereoscopic compression is this loss of edges, or what are called occlusions, occluded fronts. So loss of edge information causes your brain to struggle to position an object in space, and it's a fairly insidious form of eye strain because it sort of it gangs up on you. You don't feel it quite at first. You can watch 5 minutes and not really notice it, but you watch 20 minutes and you start to feel like you need to rub your eyes, or your eyes are getting tired. And so, yeah, and that can, if you continue to watch, even though you're feeling the eye strain, it can result in headaches. And so this one issue of edges and occlusions is probably one of the most insidious problems with distributing 3D to the home, and our system directly addresses that.
So how does it? Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to add that, since as the audience or the viewer, since we're the ones, when you watch a 3D movie or a 3D film at a theater at home, since your brain's what's putting the two images together, just like at home in the theater, Hollywood's struggling, and they're not necessarily struggling, but you've got good and bad 3D films that have come out. They're not all equal. Some are dimensionalized, and some are shot in pure stereo with 3D cameras. And between those, you've got good dimensionalization and bad dimensionalization, and good 3D stereographic shooting, and some that's bad. And there's been some flops and some hits. So I think across those, someone might have experienced a particular film that might have had bad 3D, and may not have realized that their brain was working harder to fuse the left and right eye together. And so, that's the same thing as going home. If it's a good 3D movie, whether it's converted or originally shot in stereo, you should be able to sit and watch the whole movie and not have eye strain or not have a feeling of any kind of fatigue or tiredness after you finish watching the film.
Yeah, this is certainly an issue that needs more discussion, which is the difference between 3D content that's created well and 3D content that's created poorly. And the poorly created 3D is certainly going to be more likely to cause eye strain and headaches and so on. Dave A. in the chat room asks, how do you guys feel about everything being made in 3D these days?
DJ, I'll let you field that one.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, DJ.
It's a broad statement to say everything being made in 3D. I think we are going to get everything in 3D in the future. And, how it arrives there is yet to be seen. But it's coming, and technology is going to keep improving, and we're going to end up seeing, everything from news, as we're seeing sports now, and movies. But it's all coming in 3D, and there's a lot of different reasons why 3D in different ways works well. Not saying that every single thing works in 3D, but there's definitely a lot of things being explored out there, and I think it's getting to that right combination in different fields of what works. And unfortunately, 3D is really, really hard to do, and it's not something that there's a lot of bright and creative minds in Hollywood and very talented people, but it's not something you can go take a weekend workshop and get updated on what's new in 3D, so you can go out and do what you did before. It's a whole new way of thinking, and it's a whole new way of filmmaking. It's a whole new way of composing and storytelling. For someone to say that it works for dramatic or not for dramatic, but it works for action movies, I don't know that that's necessarily true. I think it works in a lot of different types of films, but the way in which you approach that is completely different.
Mm-hmm. David, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I think in general, as being a provider of this content to the home, we're in favor of everything being in 3D. So the more
well, okay, I'm glad you admit your bias. That's fine.
Yes. And frankly, we cast a pretty broad net when we look at content that's appropriate to send down the wire. It's not just Hollywood motion pictures. It's there are independents out there that are doing amazing work. Probably DJ, comment on this more, but the standard for quality is probably some of these IMAX 3D documentaries, which are just technically stunning 3D and stunningly beautifully shot. In addition to that, so that's again, those are pretty broadly focused documentary content. DJ mentioned sports, so I think it's a pretty broad net. And there's a pretty broad appeal of adding the third dimension to lots of different genres.
Sure, but Web 6597 asks, do we really need news in 3D?
Well, do we need warfield, war correspondence in 3D? Would that give you more of an empathetic connection with what's going on the ground?
Good point.
Yeah, I think so.
I could see things where not only would something as much as a State of the Union address, for just a wild example, you might see expressions different from the president to, like Dave said, a war correspondent. I could see an anchor back in the newsroom doing some geometry breakdown because of the three-dimensional data coming back, and be able to it might change a world event because they're able to glean data from the stereoscopic images.
Mm-hmm. We, a number of people in the chat room are also talking about what James Cameron announced at NAB, which is higher frame rates. How will this affect the comfort of watching 3D? Do you think he's right that shooting at 48 or even 60 frames per second will decrease the discomfort?
He is absolutely correct. We completely concur. The temporal resolution, the resolution at which you catch objects moving in time, also creates sharper edges or more defined objects when they're in motion. And so just that one factor, the factor of objects moving and being able to capture them on film, the higher frame rates create sharper objects. The brain can place them in space easier, and it makes for a much more comfortable and much more realistic viewing experience. So we couldn't agree more. In fact, our own technology for sports utilizes a variable frame rate, which can go all the way up to 60 frames a second, and that's important. You probably have viewers out there in the chat room who've seen some 3D sports televised where everything looks great until the playfield is in motion, until the ball moves. And then once the ball is kicked or is thrown, you can't place it in space anymore because there's not enough temporal resolution for the object to be drawn with sharp edges. It creates a lot of motion blur, and the brain struggles to place it in space. So we're on exactly the same page with respect to the necessity for higher frame rates.
Great. F-Loop in the chat room brings us back to where the next question I wanted to ask, which is, where in the chain is the next 3D product or production? encode, decode. So take us through your technology and how it is used to deliver 3D to the home.
Absolutely. So the core technology is actually a codec. So it's an encoder and a decoder. We have two executions of that core technology. The first one is that we are launching a video on demand service. The first client for it, the first users will be PC users. We're primarily targeting users who are already doing stereoscopic gaming, so already have 3D ready PCs and have them connected to 3D displays. So we're building a video on demand service called Next 3D TV for those users. And where our technology exists in that food chain is that we are the encoder, we transmit, so we're the content delivery system, and then we are the decoder or player that you run at the other end, as if you were running a Netflix client, for instance, a Netflix player. So we're at both ends of that spectrum. We also have another business unit, which is designed around live events. And in that case, again, we're at both ends of the food chain. So we're at the encode side and the decode side, but there's much more emphasis, or there's much more product and engineering around the encoder, which is having to do everything that it's doing to get this content to you in full HD 3D in real time for live events. And so that's a different development for us.
Okay, let's start with the encoder, which I believe you called CESE, Compound Entropy Stereoscopic Encoding. That's a mouthful, but take us through briefly how it works.
Encoders have to be a mouthful. You have to come up with a long acronym, or it wouldn't qualify as an encoder. The way compound entropy works actually is it's relatively descriptive. The encoder has the capability of allocating how much complexity is used to describe a frame. And it does so in a way that's aware of the stereoscopic information that's included in the frame. And by example, if we were transmitting a scene which includes a background that's a mountainscape and a foreground that's a moving car, the encoder would allocate less entropy to the background because it's transmitting them twice. It can more efficiently transmit that information because it's essentially the same information in both the left and right eye as that's getting transmitted. Whereas there's the object in the foreground is quite different because of the way stereoscopic cameras work. And it's in motion, which creates difference between the left eye and right eye. And that information would be given more priority in the way the encoder works. And so information that's redundant, that's being sent in both eyes, that's roughly similar, gets less allocation of encoder complexity than information that's novel to one or the other eye.
You can see here that in the video that we now have an example of how your technology works versus more conventional 3D technologies. And I think just to reiterate what you were saying earlier, you're identifying redundancies and identifying sharp edges. Am I correct about that?
That's correct. The edges are actually a separate component of the encode. The redundancy elimination, or actually the allocation of encoder complexity to stuff that's novel, is one thing. That's the compound entropy. The other thing we actually do is preserve in a stream that's separate from the encoded data edge information that's used to recover detail that can be lost through ordinary digital compression, which is ultimately used for encoding our content. And so that allows us to enhance edges very effectively on playback, which again gives us that detail that allows you to place an object in space easier than if it were blurry.
Mm-hmm. So if we take a look at that image one more time, which I believe is, there it is. We take a look at your system and we see a lot of redundancy, basically the same image in both eyes.
That's correct.
And the result, a typical thing on the right, a typical 3D just simply takes those two cuts their resolution, their horizontal resolution in half in this case, puts them side by side, and then shows them in 3D. And it's hard to see on this image on the stream, but you get a little bit of fuzzy edges.
Yes, absolutely.
Whereas on the left, you see your system where you identify the redundancy, you have a single image, and then some edge information, which results in much sharper edges at the final end.
Absolutely, that's correct.
And we can see that also in Figure 2. If Burke will pull up Figure 2 here, we'll be able to see another example of what that would look like, in which I believe there it is, it's a cube on a background of some circular stuff. And you could, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, what this is illustrating actually is how important those edges are. These are fundamentally the same images, but you can place the object that has the well-defined edges that's on the left in space because of the edges. That boundary information gives the brain what it needs to say that object exists in front of the background. The object on the right, because of the loss of that information, makes it much more difficult for the brain to know where it exists. Mm-hmm. And what happens in stereo is that cube would be presented to you with a lot of what's called parallax information if it were to be floating out of the screen, which means there's actually a visible separation between the position of the object going to your left eye and the position of the object going to your right eye. So your brain your brain is asked to present to accept a difference in that information as to mean that the object should be in front of the screen, should be coming forward in the screen. But by denying the brain the edge information, you confuse the monocular cue that the brain always uses to tell where the object should be in space, and it creates a rivalry. Your brain says, well, the parallax information is there. I should be seeing this in front of the screen, but I can't tell where the edges are, so I have no way to actually separate it from the background, and that causes very serious eye strain.
DJ, did I hear you want to jump in here?
I was just commenting earlier that that second image, I think, showed a little bit better, even on the stream, that the sharper edge, which is really the information your brain needs to help put it back together. It really just means you're not having to work as hard, which it really makes. It's unfortunately we can't show it right here on right now, but it's pretty dramatic to have the edges on and then the edges off. It's especially in a test where you watch like an entire movie, beyond a 5-minute demo, you can really walk away with a complete feeling of like you just watched a HD movie, or you feel tired and you're not sure why.
Right, exactly. And then the other advantage, one advantage of this process, of this approach that you're taking, is that it cuts down on the required bandwidth to send 3D, correct?
That's exactly right. And so using the compression, we can achieve the visual equivalent to a 3D Blu-ray disc at about 8 megabits a second, which is would allow users of DSL or cable modems typically to receive that in real time and streaming from us, and not have to wait for it to buffer. So that again, the sort of you can put the quality of what you can get over the wire at about 8 megabits on par visually with what a 3D Blu-ray disc looks like, and that experience for most consumers is actually very good. The 3D Blu-ray content that's out there is by and large very high quality, and the experience is quite good and doesn't cause eye strain. So that's sort of the visual, that's the brass ring, if you will, is sort of hitting that mark for movies with 3D Blu-ray, not for sports or fast action, because that's a different set of challenges.
F-Loop in the chat room asks, how is this technology different from Blu-ray multi-view coding?
Well, MVC is primarily the multi-view coding. MVC is an extension to MPEG-4. For those of you who don't know, that does enable is a relatively efficient way to take a left and right eye image pair, a stereo pair, and at the post the actual encode process eliminates some redundancies. And so it is MVC encoding is another form, separate from ours, another form of what's called differential encoding, which can get rid of redundancies. The practical reality is, however, that MVC has been primarily optimized for Blu-ray, where bandwidth isn't really an issue. It's fixed, right? It's 40 megabits a second, and it always will be. And capacity is not a factor. Capacity is plenty for a 2-hour, a 90-minute movie. So that MVC hasn't really been optimized for low bit rates. And so what we're able to do is achieve a visual quality of that Blu-ray encode at let's say 30 to 35 megabits at somewhere around 8 megabits, because we've spent much more time optimizing for lower bit rates.
Now, you mentioned earlier, that brings up the point you mentioned earlier about your codec being frame rate adaptive, and you mentioned 8 megabits per second, which is pretty low compared to Blu-ray, but it's still pretty high compared to what most people get in the United States in terms of their bandwidth. I read someplace recently that the U.S. in 2010 was number 30 in the world in terms of average per capita bandwidth available to consumers at just under 8 megabits, 7.78, I think it was, compared to, say, South Korea, which was number 1 at 20-something.
Right.
So there aren't... I mean, yeah, sure, there are some people who get 8 megabits, particularly those who are fortunate enough to be in an area with Fios or something like that, but generally cable or DSL delivered bandwidth isn't going to be anywhere near 8 megabits.
Well,
it's sort of a statsmanship issue. You're sort of skating to where the puck is going here in terms of bandwidth. When we first started looking at a streaming product that didn't require progressive download, the targets were 2 to 3 megabits a second. But just to be clear, 8 megabits is our highest quality product. That is that there's no resolution compromise if you're receiving a streaming at 8 megabits. If you have a connection that's lower than that, you have two choices for non-live events. One is that you allow for a progressive download, which means that the client will buffer and tell you when you'll be ready to start viewing. And if you're using a video on demand service that's in high def right now, if you're below 8 megabits and you're using something like Netflix or Vudu, you already will have experienced what I'm talking about, which is this progressive download that will give you a barometer and tell you when enough of the content has arrived to start viewing. So you'll have that option from us. However, you also can bracket the quality down. And if it's a live event, you'll have to, because you have to receive it. This is not something that we would progressively download to you. And therefore, the way we bracket down to 6 and then 4 and even lower megabits a second is in a way that is designed to first preserve the stereoscopic experience. It's sort of a first do no harm. And so we actually change the resolution of the transmitted image in a way that reduces some depth information, or the amount of difference between the eye views as we transmit. And there's some mathemagic in here, and some of it's proprietary, but the effect is that the content becomes less likely to cause eye strain as we reduce the bandwidth that we're distributing to you, and it's in very small amounts. So we drop quality in a way that still preserves the information that's very important to you to have a comfortable 3D viewing experience. And so we preserve that above other aspects of the content. So it's more, you'll see a very high quality image on a 3D television at 6 megabits or even at 5 megabits a second using our streaming service.
Yeah. And speaking of streaming, before we go on, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsor for this episode of Home Theater Geeks, Netflix. I'm going to ask you about Netflix in a minute there, you guys. But before I do, I just want to say to those who might not know about Netflix, which is probably very few people on this podcast, that they deliver movies directly to your home, movies and TV shows directly to your home by streaming or by hard disk by mail in one business day. But with streaming, you can watch thousands of TV shows and movies instantly, streamed directly to your PC or Mac or to your TV or Blu-ray player, which are now almost all equipped to handle that directly, as well as your game systems, Xbox 360, PS3, or Nintendo Wii. You can watch as many movies as you want for one low price, and there's never a late fee or due date or anything like that. One streaming pick of the week I'd like to bring to your attention is Star Trek, the new 2009 Star Trek, starring Chris Pine and Zachary Quinto, and directed by J.J. Abrams. Most of you out there know this movie already. It's a reboot of the Star Trek franchise, and being a hardcore Trekker myself, I was quite pleased with it. It brought Star Trek into a new generation, even more so than the next generation. And I really liked the story and the characters, and the whole thing was, I thought, really well done, and a beautiful Blu-ray, certainly, if you want to go that route. But if you want to go streaming, which is, it's now available as a stream, it's also an excellent choice. You can instantly watch this movie or choose from thousands of others, TV episodes and movies, when you register for a free trial membership. Just go to netflix.com/twit. Be sure to sign up for your free trial at netflix.com/twit. So speaking of which, have you guys been talking with Netflix or other streamers about adding your technology to their stream?
We're talking with a lot of people
maybe
right
you
now.
can't talk about it.
We have not spoken with Netflix yet, no.
Well, that would certainly be a good company to talk to. Certainly, given that you're streaming, I don't think anyone's streaming 3D yet, are they?
Voodoo is side.
Ah, okay.
Side. But yeah, if your sponsors at Netflix are listening, call us. We'd love to talk to you. All kidding aside, it makes sense for us to look for partnerships that are equivalent to some of the things that we're doing in the live streaming realm, where we can build that piece of the infrastructure that we're good at, which is delivering the content at the best bang for your bit in 3D, and not build out all the other components. That said, Next 3D TV will go live, and it has given us an opportunity to learn a tremendous amount, to be involved, and it's been a very hands-on experience in terms of getting content from the providers, encoding, making sure that our quality metrics are preserved in the process of getting the product ready for delivery. So I don't think, I think that was an essential part of developing the product as it is right now. So we had to build what we had to build, and essentially it is a delivery service. But it would also make an excellent addition to another video on demand service provider's portfolio. And you're certainly willing and able and eager to talk to any and all content providers, I'm sure. I know you're working with some now. Who can you talk about? If anyone. DJ, can you?
Sure. The only one we can talk about right now, there was a recent announcement which on expanded alliance with Turner Broadcasting Systems, and currently in this phase of what we're doing, we're working on a live full HD 3D streaming setup for them, and that's we're in the middle of testing right now for full HD live streaming of sporting events and things like that. We're talking with a lot of people right now, but we can't talk about who all we're talking to, but it's probably a lot of the obvious suspects.
Sure.
I was going to point out one other thing back on that quality thing. So something some of your audience, if some of the audience, if they're curious to test themselves, would be to take a 3D Blu-ray they might have that's also available on demand, whether it be through a streaming or their cable or satellite provider, and actually when they watch the Blu-ray and then watch the same movie in side or top bottom, you can really see what we've all been talking about here about those edges being gone and the quality having to work harder, especially if you watch the Blu-ray first and then go and watch something on cable or satellite. You'll see very quickly, even if something like Avatar or some of the IMAX films that are there, what the big difference is in not having that quality there.
Now, I don't imagine there are that many titles that are available on 3D Blu-ray that are also being broadcast in 3D. There are probably a few, but not very many. Do you guys offer any demonstrations of this? Not side by side in the sense of regular side by side versus Next 3D on your website or somewhere where people can go and check it out directly like that?
Well, we are planning on launching a beta very soon. There is a sign-up page on our website that if someone's interested in the beta, they can go and sign up, and we'll notify them as soon as we're getting close to that, which is pretty soon. As far as I'm trying to think if there's some of the slides that we've given you are on our website right now.
They are.
They are, okay. And they probably could see them there, outside of the stream. You could probably see some of those images that Scott put up earlier sharper and really see what's being said there in a better way.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of that, we do have a one more image that I wanted to put up. It's figure 3, as I sent it up to our engineer, and gives you a few other examples. Here you go. It may not be so easy to see on the stream that we're sending out, but it is clear when you look at the picture that I originally saw that the image on the I can't tell whether it's right or left on this stream, unfortunately. David, maybe you can help me out here.
Well, actually, it's hard. It's really hard to see from the streaming image, but the PDF is available at next3d.com. In the About Us section, there, you can download the PDF at high resolution
there you
and
go.
be able to actually see those exact images that you just put up in comparative encoding that's in our format and then encoded side to really be able to tell the difference.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, go right ahead.
No, I was going to say the test that DJ recommended is an interesting one for a lot of people because there's this unique sort of experience that happens when you watch more than just a few minutes of 3D. You can tolerate very bad 3D for a few minutes. It takes a while, and at least some of the forms of iStream, some of the worst ones, they're a bit cumulative, so it takes a little while before they start to register. So, or just a lot of people, even in our industry, who will watch series of 5-minute demos over and over again and say, well, yeah, that looks great. And the reality is after half an hour, your eyes are either burning or everything's fine. So, that and Blu-ray does sort of set the bar. 3D Blu-ray is actually very good, and the viewing experience is, at least the medium doesn't make it worse. So if it's good going in, it'll be a good experience on your home screen, and you can see. And that really isn't the case with the broadcast formats right at the moment.
The quality of the content itself brings up another question that is the skittering around the chat room right now, which is, okay, producing 3D from scratch, we need to educate directors and stereographers and so on how to do that well. What about converting 2D to 3D, which we've seen some good examples of, again, and some bad examples of? I think it's... How do you guys feel about that?
I personally think there's some great films that are being converted right now, and the same as filmmaking. I think there's conversions being done in a very high quality way, and they have filmmakers involved that know stereo and know 3D, and that are in there in the trenches making creative decisions on where objects are placed. And then there's other conversion processes that are not so good, or they might be good, but a producer or studio might just hand off the material to someone and say, go do it, and think it's more of a mechanical, just run it through the system. And I still think it comes back to the same as making a film. There's an organic side to it. So even though there's a big technical team of people doing the conversion, you still need someone there making those organic, creative decisions to make that as good as it can be.
I was talking to one guy at NAB who said that really there's no difference between content that was generated in 3D to begin with and 2D content that was converted to 3D if it was done well, because you're still having this simulated 3D, basically stereoscopic imagery, which isn't the same as actually looking out into the real world. So if it's done well in either case, there really should be no difference between them. Would you agree?
I don't agree with that. A synthesized view is different optically than a binocular view, because your eyes and two cameras can see around the edges of objects. It's a factor that's called roundness when you talk about how a 3D scene is composed. That view can't be synthesized. You can't create that with that information missing. You don't get that back. The best conversion processes use an artistic technique to recreate it, but it's a simulation, and it's open to the amount of, as DJ said, the amount of work, and this is sometimes hand painting in and rotoscoping information that's missing from the frame. So sort of hand retouching each frame in a very artistic, kind of lovingly way. And so, you're coming from an artist's mind, putting that information back on the screen, but it's definitely missing. And it's only an approximation when you synthesize it, whereas the camera sees two views, and the information, if the cameras are configured properly, the information is there and natural, and the physics of that describe the scene are appropriate.
I would also add that I think as far as the kind of holy grail of 3D filmmaking is the higher frame rates that are being discussed now and are being shot on films. And really it's a film that's shot originally in stereoscopic 3D, but there's a hybrid to that, which is using all the muster of the word we've all heard, movie magic, is to take and shoot in 3D. But there's actually things you can do in computers and in conversions to enhance the 3D and the creativity of a film, where there might be shots you would do in 2D that you're going to dimensionalize that might be impossible to do with a 3D camera. Something that's not an in-camera effect that you could actually accentuate better by doing it in a computer, but not necessarily the whole film. And it might be literally a brief shot here or there, but it allows you to trick the brain and you think you see something you didn't see. So there is a combination where there is, but I agree with what Dave said as far as just taking something and converting it is just as good as. I would disagree.
Mm-hmm. Your comments there led me to think about another comment that same guy made off this particular topic, but what you were talking about earlier, that there are actually some shots in Avatar that are converted from 2D. He said that, I've forgotten who the guy was, maybe it was Pace, I've forgotten who. There were a few shots, isolated shots, that had trouble in 3D, that didn't work for some reason. The cameras didn't work or something. They couldn't go back and reshoot it. So they took the 2D and converted it. And it's publicly known that there are like 12 shots, apparently, that actually got converted from 2D to 3D in this 3D this movie that was supposed to be the end-all and be-all of 3D.
Well, I would say it's probably not the cameras. I've worked with those cameras and shot with them extensively, the Pace cameras, and they're very good cameras. But there are places. It's kind of hard to articulate over this call, but there are types of shots that you could have a meritable reason why you'd want to creatively convert that shot. And I don't know that there's anything technically wrong with that. the term smoke and mirrors is pretty heavy duty term that comes and used liberally in Hollywood or creative license. And at the end of the day, if it helps the filmmaker tell their story or create the effect that they're going for, obviously, I don't know how many shots it was, if it was 12 or 2 or 10 or whatever, but obviously Cameron's a very capable filmmaker, and I would imagine if he thought it was going to be better one way or the other, he would do what he feels is the best way to get done what he's trying to envision.
Sure. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, he announced at NAB, and earlier than that even, that he was going to go to higher frame rates. F-Loop in the chat room says 48 is a scam to sell new TVs and Blu-ray players. There's no 48 hertz profile, 3D, no products yet. How are we going to transition to that, do you think?
That's a good question. Dave might be able to answer better. I'm not sure what's going to happen with Blu-rays because they only handle 24 frames. I can tell you as a filmmaker, and all business aside, that I don't know that there's any secret thing that people are trying to sell new TVs or anything like that, but I can tell you that 48 and 60 looks amazing in 3D, and if we could show it or look at it, it's, someone like Cameron's not going to go shoot a whole other movie if he didn't think it's going to make people, knock their socks off. And he's not the only one. There's a lot of people looking at it very closely.
Yeah, exactly.
In terms of the home market, it is accurate that there are no standards around those frame rates for full 1080. But we already, Next3D's technology already transmits 720 high def at 60 frames a second very successfui. So for live content and fast moving content, it's essential. And the equipment that you have in terms of a display at home, your television, is more than capable of doing 1080 at a 60 hertz refresh rate in 3D. The problem, unfortunately, that we have as an industry is that the connection between whatever is producing the signal, be it your cable box or your PC or your Blu-ray player, and the TV is HDMI 1.4, which is unfortunately and somewhat tragically limited at 1080 to 24 hertz. This gets us right in the heart, and it really also gets the gaming community, who would certainly like to be playing Crysis 2 at full 1080 on their brand new 3D TV, but they can't because you can't play that game at 24 hertz. You need the full refresh rate. You need 60 hertz. So there needs to be a give here, and it certainly falls on, I think, there are standards to be developed around around these higher frame rates, but really, from a technological perspective, we could send you 1080 60 to your PC or other Next3D client tomorrow. It's HDMI 1.4. The wire itself is what's sort of standing in the way, and that's not a big deal, although it may mean an equipment rev for lots of folks, and so that is a big deal. But it doesn't require a major re-innovation, certainly of the TV or display technology. They're capable of doing it, but it's something we should be addressing right now, because the more this technology becomes penetrated into the market with this built-in limitation, the more difficult it is to sort of move the market to higher frame rates. So this is a huge issue, and one that I think needs to be addressed by standards committees first. And James Cameron obviously is one of the best spokesmen for making these things happen. And the PC gaming industry is also hugely important in the sort of making folks aware that this needs to happen.
Consider It in the chat room asks, is there any place where the average Joe can go and actually see 48 hertz, 48 FPS? Is it shown anywhere that people can go see it?
There used to be show scan theaters that were only, unfortunately, they weren't 3D, but very high speed frame rates, the show scan technology. But in terms of seeing it in 3D right now, no. Probably the first, DJ, if I'm missing something, chime in, let me know, but probably one of the first ways to see it is going to be 720/60 using our beta. And if you sign up for it, it's free. It's something you can download and see on your 3D ready PC, and that's probably 45 days away.
I mean, maybe in a crude sense, maybe a crude comparison is that, like, right now, if you watch a Hollywood movie that's shot at 24 frames, there's motion blurring and things in there. And if you watch, Monday Night Football, it's shot even at 60i, you get that action that's captured there, which is different than 60p. I think that some of the 48 and 60 conversations also has to do with the digital cinema and the servers and what can be served to the projectors and so on right now versus in a few years. The ultimate is to have 60p. But 40 is out there, I think, for a myriad of reasons, probably more than we can go into, in today's talk. But I think there's information out there about it, and but there's reasons and merits for both. But I don't know of anywhere else other than downloading our client, as Dave said, in the near future would be one way for someone to test it themselves. And I'm not sure if there's any other ways to show it right now.
You said you're going to be shooting live sports at 720p 60. Is that correct?
There are people shooting 720p 60 right now.
But I mean, in terms of what's going to be available from Next 3D TV.
Yes.
Initially, yes.
It'll be adaptive. It'll be 60 when it's needed. So 60 when it counts, and it will be less when it's not needed, and that means when there's not so much motion and action. But yeah, at the top of when it's running full bore, you'll be getting 720, 60 frames a second from us.
Mm-hmm. F-Loop asks, why even consider 48? Why not just go to 60 to begin with?
I think DJ's point is that's an infrastructure issue with digital cinema projectors and the servers that are connected to them, and so it may be more compatible with the existing infrastructure to go to 48 rather than 60. I think that's the big issue, isn't it, DJ?
I think so. That's one of them. It's probably the same as saying, why not just go all digital or all film? There's still thousands of theaters out there, so movies are released in as many as 14, 16 different formats, and not just different formats of digital and film when they come out. And so it's very possible that a film might get shot in 60 and released in 48 to the theaters that can handle it with their current digital infrastructure, and theaters that have upgraded to 60 will do that. Just like we have 3D theaters right now that have really nice large screens, and some 3D theaters have smaller screens. So and then you can choose if you want to go to the big screen and drive a little farther, or go to the one that's next door.
Cinetech Geek in the chat room asks, why only 720 at 60 and not full 1080? Dave, I think you addressed this a moment ago, but if you could just go over it again.
It's HDMI is the problem. We'd love to send you 1080 at 60, but if you're connecting your PC to one of the 3D ready TVs on the market right now, you're limited. Those televisions can't go faster than 24 frames per second at 1080, and that's actually, it's not the television at all. It's the HDMI specification, HDMI 1.4, that those televisions carry. So it's an HDMI thing, unfortunately.
Right. HDMI 1.4 went to uses the same bandwidth as 1.3, which is 10.2 gigabits. And I don't remember the calculation off the top of my head, but
there's enough bandwidth there. If you do the math, there is enough bandwidth to carry the signal. It's not where the problem lies. I don't really want to get into it. There's some politics involved, but the reality is that the existing HDMI chipsets, the chipsets that were on the market when 3D sort of barreled its way into the consumer electronics market it was easier to rev them to be able to do HDMI 1.4 than it was to go beyond that in terms of specification. So anyway, that sort of it was I think more of a silicon, what was easy to put on silicon and get the televisions in the market quickly.
DJ, did you want to chime in there?
I'm good. I think we covered it just now.
Okay, very good. Let's see. Eric Duckman in the chat room says, if you want to stop action blur, you're going to have to go way faster than 60 frames per second. How about 1,000th of a second? That would be good. Well, sure, it would.
Absolutely. More is probably, more content, will continue to be better. And, that where the physiology of your eye and the image retention of your eye meets frame rate is probably faster than 60. I think there's some pretty, there's been some pretty interesting studies on this. Douglas Trumbull, for one, did a tremendous amount of study in terms of frame rate and the physiology of audiences in 2D. And so, that being said, you have to couple to a standard, right? Because the camera back end, the decks that record, the compression technology just on the production side, and then post-production, and then obviously encoding, transmission, and display, that whole ecosystem has to play. And so we've got to reach out for, the next spec. Having seen 60, I can tell you it's pretty darn good for stuff that's moving fast. And I mean, that's moving really fast sports, really high-speed sports. So, we've seen, there have been a lot of very fast, a lot of tests with lots of motion, NASCAR, basketball. So I think, it's a great next rung on the ladder to grab for, and it's going to make for infinitely more comfortable viewing than we're getting right now on the 24.
What do you think about Thunderbolt? Do you think that offers an option beyond HDMI? Do you think that might be the next way to go to get a higher frame rate to the TV?
Yeah, I don't know if it's DisplayPort or it's Thunderbolt or it's a rev of HDMI. Frankly, I would be more hopeful because of HDMI's influence in the consumer electronic their current sort of installed base and footprint with the consumer electronics manufacturers, and every major CE manufacturer is pretty involved in HDMI. I would think they might be where we'd want to, we'd sort of hang our initial hope for a consumer standard that's faster. But there are competing standards. Thunderbolt's an excellent example, and HDMI is actually becoming more like that. The last standard included an Ethernet, an IP protocol or Ethernet communication on the wire. So they're starting to converge, and DisplayPort's got tons of bandwidth. We'd be, if we all had DisplayPorts, this would be a moot issue. But again, I think, it's going to be what is convenient and accessible for the CE manufacturers to integrate. The tradition has been since HD, the tradition has been HDMI.
Right. Well, on that note, I'm afraid we have to say goodbye because we've come to the end of a fascinating hour. Thank you so much, Dave and DJ, for enlightening us about Next 3D. And people can go and look at your stuff on next3d.com and sign up for the beta of the Next 3D TV stream and take a look at what you guys are doing. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for all the great questions, too.
Yeah, thanks to the chat room. They've been coming up with some great chat rooms, that's for sure. So again, that's next3d.com, and my online homes are ultimateavmag.com and hometheater.com. You can email me at scott@twit.tv and follow me on Twitter at @HTGeekScott. Next week, my guest geek is scheduled to be Ron Williams, an imaging consultant and an industry veteran with lots of interesting stories to tell about his days and years and decades in the TV and movie industry. So I sure hope you will join me for that. Until then, geek out.